30 Minutes with Ron. Hello, and welcome to this edition of 30 Minutes with Ron. I'm Ron Gagliardi, the host of 30 Minutes with Ron, and we've gone to great expense to have this evening's guest. She's a wonderful person. She goes by the title of the Midwife of Life. And I would like to introduce to you now Hannah Bajor. Hannah, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. I am very excited about today's show.
Well, we have some information that we're going to glean from you, hopefully that the audience will be interested in and that will help them. First of all, how did you get to this point in like less than 10 minutes?
Well, I was born and raised in the middle of Ireland, and I grew up with a big family. I had 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and my entire life I have always been surrounded with women that were pregnant. So one of my favorite things as a child growing up would be to actually put a doll up underneath my jumper, and I'd walk up and down the street, always pregnant, always on my way to the hospital to deliver my baby, and I'd walk down the road, stop at a particular house which had a big huge bush in the on the railings, and I'd put my doll in, take it out, put her into the pram, and I'd walk back home. So my entire life has always been about a mindset of taking care of women that were pregnant and being pregnant. And my mother, every Christmas, faithfully, Santa would always put under the tree a nurse's outfit. And I was the only one out of the 3 girls that she'd buy a nurse's outfit for. And so maybe she knew, I don't know, a mother sometimes know, but maybe she knew I'd end up being a nurse.
Yep.
And that's, so I think maybe I was encoded or pushed a little bit to become a nurse. And that's what I ended up doing. When I finished school, I became a nurse, I became a midwife, and ended up here in America.
Interesting. Now there's a story in between there. I happen to be aware of this because I interviewed Hannah for an article in Cheshire Magazine, which I just happen to have over here. This is the issue of Cheshire Magazine, and if you don't have it and you want to look at the article, it's in issue number 3 on page 16, I think it is, and you can find it online at RDS Media LLC. And if you go there, there's covers of the different magazines, and it actually flips. So let me see here. Page 16, yes. Midwife escapes from Saudi Arabia. Now, she told me this story, and it was like, sound like a movie script. So can you share a little bit of how this happened?
Well, of course, like a lot of girls when we were growing up, you'd always want to travel the world. And I actually ended up going to England to become a nurse, because it was impossible to become a nurse in Ireland in my days. And the reason is, unless your father had lots of money or knew somebody on the board in the hospital, you were not going to get into nursing in Ireland, because that's what everybody wanted to do. So I decided before I finished school that I was going to be a nurse, and I didn't care what anybody else was telling me. Very determined young lass when I was growing up. So what I did was I went down to the library, because when I grew up we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have cars, none of that, but we had a great library. Went down and I searched what was the name of nursing schools in England, and I came up with 7 of them. And I wrote to all 7 schools to say I was going to go over to England in this week, and could they interview me on Monday? And the next letter I'd say, could you interview me on Tuesday? And so I ended up arranging 7 interviews the first week, for the full week.
Yep.
And so of course I got into all 7 of the schools in England, and I became a nurse in England. But part of when you were a nurse in England, a lot of nurses at that time went out to Saudi Arabia. The money was supposed to be really good when you go out there. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia, and I applied for a job. And I remember being at the interview in London, and they said, like, well, do you know anything about cultural shock? Well, I didn't know anything about cultural shock. I just know we were called country mugs growing up, never mind cultural shocks. And so I said, no, I don't. And she said, well, you know, she tried to explain it, but the truth is she had no clue what it was. So I went out, got the job, went out to Saudi Arabia. And I have to say, it was like going to another planet. From the moment I got off the airplane, which the weather was 130 degrees. I mean, going from England, like I'd never experienced that type of heat. And I remember getting off the plane thinking, oh, maybe the pilot left the engines on. It was that hot, right? So I went from there, I went inside the airport, and it was literally a sea. In my mind, it was a sea of men. They all were dressed in the white gear and the red thing around their head. I thought it was like they were all wearing pillowcases. I'd never even seen anybody that was dressed in traditional Arab gear. And they all looked the same to me, and there was no women. Like nobody had prepared me for this cultural shock, right? So nobody speaks any English. And anyway, finally, with a pure miracle, I did find somebody that was picking me up, and ended up being in Saudi Arabia. And I have to say, it was one amazing, horrific, frightening experience, one after the other. And it was started just from the airport to finding myself working in a situation in another country where the standard of care was far inferior to what I was used to. And just seeing how another country works, like we'd have, women would swap their babies over, you know, say if a woman had all boys and another woman had all girls. Well, of course, you know, in Saudi, it was much preferred to have a male child.
Right.
And that was expected of you. And if you couldn't produce a male child, then that was bad. So the women would swap the babies over. It was no big issue at all. It was just horrific, frightening. I did actually create the whole story on YouTube. So if anybody wants to go and really see episode after episode of cultural shock, it's all available for anybody to watch online.
All right, so you eventually had to escape in the trunk of a car from a friendly guard?
Oh, yes. Well, that was because, you know, I went out on a 90-day contract, and I realized pretty soon this was unsafe practice. You know, I had worked to get my nursing and midwifery career, and I didn't want to lose my license. And I was delivering babies without gloves. And a lot of the population had hepatitis B, and so we were expected to deliver without gloves. So I didn't want to stay there, and plus coming from Ireland, I was only used to very plain food, like potatoes, maybe chicken, not much vegetables. And here I was in Saudi eating American food, which everything had mayonnaise on it. A lot of tuna fish. So I had never been exposed to this. A lot of ketchup, and I couldn't physically eat the food. And the only way I actually was able to get food, because as a woman in Saudi Arabia, you weren't allowed to go to the store and buy your food. That was an impossibility unless you found a married couple that was going to take you there. So I handed in my notice, and I said, you know, I wanted to leave, and they told me a tough S word. Can't say it on camera.
No.
But they said, no, you're here for the year, whether you like it or not. And that led to a series then of events where I felt like, okay, I had to produce evidence of this malpractice that was going on here. And we were having other midwives that were working there that were trained in Ireland. And I tell you, there weren't, at that time, they were not as good as us as British trained midwives. And there was things happening to these women, and I was very upset about it. And eventually, to produce, you know, to be able to get out of the country, I had to take a chance on my own life to be able to get out of this compound, because when you go there, you're in this big compound and you can't get out.
Wow.
You know, as a single woman, you can't leave. You're there, and the only way you can leave is if they give you back your passport. And that this administration wasn't prepared to do.
So, but you did eventually get out of there.
I did.
And you got over to America, and you started a midwife practice.
Well, I didn't actually. I never started my own practice here, but I was actually very lucky. I initially came out to America. My sister was living here, and so I decided, okay, I'll go to America. And they were looking for nurses at the time, so I was able to get a work visa when I came out here first. And I have to say, this America has been the best experience I could ever have possibly envisioned for a nurse and midwife. And I was the first midwife that was approved by the American College of Nurse Midwife. They had a pilot program when I came out here first, and they interviewed over 500 people, and they only picked 12 of us. And I was the first one that was picked. I was so lucky.
Yeah.
And that's how I became a midwife here in America. So I didn't have to do all my training over again. We just had to prove as a British trained midwife I was as good as the American midwives. And of course I had to do all the exams, and I had to have somebody watch me do deliveries. And so that's how I got my midwifery credentials here in America.
Okay. Now I have to say, in the effort to have full disclosure, I know Hannah pretty well. I've worked with her and for her, and we're actually currently working on a project that has a little humor to it that we'll talk about later. But I do want to have you tell the audience that you were trying to get pregnant for a while, and that a whole bunch of things happened after the failures of getting pregnant that's going to help anyone in the audience who's interested in that topic. So can you tell us all about that?
Well, I shared with you like how I grew up, and I always thought being pregnant was a very easy thing to do. In fact, I remember when I went to England first and I learned about contraception. I didn't even know that there was something called birth control. And I remember going home to say to my mother, "Ma, they have these pills, and if you take them, you won't get pregnant." Well, my mother was disgusted with me.
Oh.
She sat me down at the table and she knocked on the table, 1, 2, 3, and she said, "My dear girl, you will never use birth control. It's illegal." And that was it. So, of course, you know, I'm coming, when I decided to have my kids, I never thought for a moment that I would ever have a problem getting pregnant. And lo and behold, it actually took me, I tried for 10 years on my own. 10 years trying every month, failing, being totally devastated. And for me, I think it was a little harder because I was working with pregnant women all the time, right? And so every day in my life, I'm surrounded by these women, which for me, I wanted so much to be them.
Yeah.
And so it was hard. And after 10 years of trying, I did get pregnant. And it was like, oh my God, a miracle. I decided I was going to stop working. I stayed at home. And I just, you know, at that time, I was about, I'd say, 38. So I really, you know, I know at 38 you can run into some complications just because of your age being pregnant. And lo and behold, when I got to 16 weeks, what happened? The baby died inside me. So I ended up then having to have a mini labor, and that was totally devastating to me. And I know if any other woman out there has had a miscarriage, you know, your whole life you feel it's just falling apart. And that's what happened to me, but you know, I had to pull myself up. And I decided in that moment that, you know, Hannah, maybe you should go and get some help. Maybe you should go and see an infertility specialist. And I was lucky enough that my insurance had changed at work as well, because infertility treatment is very expensive. It's most women don't know, but IVF is about $12,500 for 1 month.
Mm.
And I ended up going and getting help. I did 6 months of infertility treatment. I was even put in an IVF cycle. And in the middle of the IVF cycle...
What does that stand for?
In vitro fertilization. Mm-hmm. That's where they take my egg out, take my husband's sperm, put them together in the lab, and then implant them. Once they have fertilized, they insert them back into the woman's body for pregnancy. And so I thought, okay, this was my big chance. I mean, at that time now I'm turning, 39, going by 40. And lo and behold, after 6 months of infertility treatment, the doctor sat me down in the middle of, I'm thinking I'm doing an IVF cycle, and said, Hannah, or Mrs. Bajor, he called me, and he folded his arms and he said, Mrs. Bajor, we're sorry. There's nothing we can do for you. You're out of eggs. Can you imagine, Ron, how that felt? Like being told I was out of eggs. And, my whole life was about delivering babies and telling people to prevent pregnancy or get pregnant, whatever it is. So I was told I could never have a biological child when I was just before I was 40. And that was a hard lesson in life to swallow. So, of course, it's like, being I'm Irish, I'm a fighter for everything. I've always had to fight my way through life. And I ended up then doing a lot of research for a full year. I actually did research. If you look, it was 10 months full time, took me about a year. And I researched, what can I do naturally to get pregnant? Because the infertility experts had said it was a hopeless case. And I did research and I came up with a specific concoction of vitamins and minerals. And lo and behold, I now have 2 kids, and I have helped so many women all over the world get pregnant, just showing them, okay, this is what you can do.
Right. Now, I remember you telling me that you have had some amazing statistics in your career. Can you tell the audience some of the people you've seen and YouTube hits and that kind of thing?
Well, I have delivered, I documented deliveries, so it could be more, was 2,000. At 2,000 I cut it off. And I have taken care of at least 10,000 other women when they were having babies. Now, they didn't deliver on my shift, but I would have been involved in that. And I have clocked in over, it's about now 50 to 60,000 hours of women's health visits in my life. And, because of my struggle that I had trying to get pregnant and even my own deliveries, I had home births and I almost died in childbirth. And because of all of that, I live what I teach women, and I really want women to have safe deliveries, and I want women to get pregnant when they want to be pregnant. So I created a YouTube channel. Of course, when I started out now, I had no clue how to even do a video. Here I am with you today on this, which is so amazing. And, I've created a lot of free stuff for women out there that they can go and check out the YouTube channel. I can't believe at this point I have almost 3 million views, which I'm thinking, wow, that is like pretty stunning. And, there's a lot of interest. A lot of women are in pain, whether they're trying to get pregnant or whether they are pregnant and have a lot of questions.
Right, so you're trying to answer some of these questions, and you're having a YouTube program and a YouTube channel, and you're sharing your formula for what you used to get pregnant with other women. Can you tell us a little about how that's going?
Well, I have had some amazing women get back to me and say, like, look, Hannah, I've had, a story. A woman had cancer of the bladder, tried all sorts of infertility treatment, didn't work. And I'm saying, look, here's what you have to do. You got to take these vitamins, but we also have to make lifestyle changes. Sometimes when women are, in fact, trying to get pregnant, they are doing things that is, in fact, killing or destroying sperm. Just like a simple thing, a lot of women use lubrication, and most of the lubrication out there is going to destroy sperm. So even though a woman's trying to get pregnant, if nobody tells you these things, then you're not going to know what you should and shouldn't be doing. Like cell phones use, even for men. A lot of men carry their cell phones in the front pocket. The radiation from that can, in fact, destroy and reduce sperm count. So there's a lot of lifestyle changes that I share with people on my videos to say, like, look, if you're really serious about getting pregnant, look at what you're doing that is going to encourage good sperm production or your egg supply.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's all about, a lot of it is about the health, the internal health and wellness of your eggs and your partner's sperm.
And you also want people to be careful after the impregnation so that there's no miscarriage. So you give some instructions on how to be better at that.
Well, the bottom line on that one, yes, is the healthier you are embarking on a pregnancy, you have a higher probability of having a good pregnancy outcome. Because a lot of women just don't realize, but on average, if you take all age groups and you put it across the board, on average, 25% of all pregnancies will end in a miscarriage.
Mm.
And of course, now if you're under 35, between 30 and 35, your chances of losing a pregnancy is 10 to 15%. When you're over 35, your chances of miscarriage can be anywhere between 25 and 40%. So women don't, a lot of women just don't know that. And there's a lot of benefit from you being really healthy before you embark on pregnancy. And that means being physically healthy and being nutritionally healthy.
Well, you shared with me some amazing statistics about the mortality rates in the United States with women who are pregnant or trying to deliver. Can you share some of that with our viewers?
Well, as of 2018, there has been a big educational force developing here in America, and the goal is to try to reduce the maternal mortality. In America right now, we are having still every year just over 700 women are dying as a result of a pregnancy complication. This is like one of the highest statistics in the world for a developed country. Mm. And when we look at those statistics, they are not coming down over the years. And not only are we losing 700 women as a result of a death because of a pregnancy complication, we are having another 50,000 women that are seriously damaged or harmed as a result of pregnancy. So their life has altered. And I, like all these other groups out there, are determined that we are going to educate women as to what women can do to try to cut down these unnecessary deaths.
You know, you call yourself the Midwife of Life, and you have a series of programs that people can see on YouTube. And working with Hannah on this, I have to say that we've had some interesting times. It's a little bit of a serious topic, but we thought every so often we should put in a little humor. So we decided to have a one-panel or two-panel cartoon featuring an egg and a sperm. And we decided to give them names that people might find interesting. Would you like to share the names that we've given them?
Well, we finally came up with the name, the Preggernauts, because we have to be, of course, Ron and myself, we have to be a little unusual. And, you know, everything is about pregnancy and what are we doing? We are helping women to launch a pregnancy or to launch a delivery. And of course, you know, I'm not just a traditional midwife. I actually am a holistic nurse practitioner. I have a whole load of credentials in energy healing and Reiki. And I totally understand that pregnancy, yes, it's very much about the art of the S word, right? And it's about these egg and the sperm meeting. But pregnancy actually also is a spiritual event. Right. And it is, you know, when we decide to become human, we come from other universes, wherever those universes are. We're not going to know till we die, but we come from somewhere else. And because of that, it was like an astronaut, preggernauts, and that's how we ended up coming up with the name. And it is, a lot of the stuff I speak about is very serious.
Right.
And so, you know, I thought, being you're the cartoon man, that would actually be, you know, was good us working together. And we came up with this, and people are loving the little cartoons because it's quite funny. Puts a little humor, or now we call humor, woomer, like womb humor,
yes,
into everything
woomer.
we do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now we have two main characters. One is an egg and one is a sperm. And we wanted names that would be mildly interesting to our viewers. And so we came up with Peggy for the egg, or sometimes we say Preggy, but I think Peggy works.
Yes.
And tell us the name for the sperm.
Herm de sperm.
Herm de sperm.
Herm
Yeah.
de sperm. So it's like Hermit the Frog, you know, Herm de sperm.
Yes.
And we're just trying to be creative because, you know, everybody learns in different ways. And some people actually like a little bit of humor.
Yeah.
And like it's working.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
yes. Now, I should bring up that Hannah is an author. There's a book here, and it looks like it's an interesting title. I've got to hold it a little higher. You can read it. I'm not even going to say it. I know there's the S word in here, though.
Yeah.
Yes. I know she's written another book, but I don't have that one. What was the title of that one?
Birth a Conscious Choice. And that is like helping everybody, not just women, men, understand that we actually make a conscious choice to become human.
Oh.
And so if your life sucks, guess what? You actually decided to come here, so you got to figure it out because nobody else is going to figure your life out for you. And so, yes, so if you're, you know, for people that are trying to get pregnant, it's a good book. If you've had a miscarriage, it's a good book. If you've had infertility, it's a good book. And one of the best testimonials I actually got from my book was from a man in Ireland that met me at a health fair there. Now, I'd say he was in his late 70s, and he never got on with his mother.
Huh.
And he, you know, his mother had died, and he had this resentment for his mother. I don't know what it was about. But he came to me, and he actually read my book and came back, and he said, Hannah, he said, I read your book, and the first thing I did, I went up to the graveside to my mother. And he said, I apologized to my mother, and I told my mother for the first time, I love you.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, it's like I never thought someone outside the pregnancy arena was going to be affected by this. So I have that, and then I have, I co-authored a book with Mark Victor Hansen from Chicken Soup from the Soul series. And that was called How Did You Do That?
And I do have to cut you off because we're getting to the close. So I want to thank you for coming. I hope if anyone's interested, they can check out Hannah's information on her website. And I have a piece of advice for all of you. Please, go to health.